Today, we welcome to the program Marc Elias, a voting rights attorney and the founder of Democracy Docket, the leading digital news platform dedicated to information, analysis, and opinion about voting rights and elections in the courts. It's such a great time to talk to you, Marc, and also particularly possibly a scary time because we often end up sort of being behind when it comes to ensuring that an election is going to happen the way that it should and that the will of the voters is going to be represented in the results. When I talk to people about what would we expect in 2024, given what Republicans tried in 2020, I hear two ideas. One idea is they tried but failed in 2020. We now know what to expect. We have some safeguards. It won't be Mike Pence, but it will be Kamala Harris, at least as far as tallying the electoral votes. It's sort of a more optimistic view. On the other hand, we get, no. They smelled blood in 2020. Yes, they failed, but they have learned from their mistakes and they have new ideas we now need to be worried about. Are you partial to one side or the other of that?
Yeah, I think I come out closer to the second, right? I mean, yes, they failed in 2020, but a couple of things I would warn people about. The first is they have upgraded their legal talent. Like, we're litigating, my law firm and I are litigating in 6 or more cases around the country, and over the course of the last few years have litigated hundreds of cases. And we're not running into the Jenna Ellis's and the Rudy Giuliani's, right? This is not the Kraken crazy lawsuits of Sidney Powell. They have upgraded their lawyers and they have used this time to try to develop new legal theories. Now, those theories, to be clear, are not gaining much purchase. They are still losing. But they have learned something from their mistakes about how to approach both voter suppression and election subversion. The second thing is that Donald Trump has, and this has been a hallmark of his candidacy and his career. He has shifted the Overton window of what is acceptable. So, stuff that would have been seen as out of bounds in the run-up to the 2020 election is now kind of just like expected of him, right? So the notion that they are, for example, suing to make it easier to harass voters and election officials is something that would have been struck people as preposterous even in the run-up to 2020. So they are much more aggressive in their legal tactics. They are much more aggressive in their legal strategies. And then finally, I would add one thing, which is that the system has been under an enormous amount of stress now for years upon years. And you're starting to see that stress take its tolls. You have seen good election officials leave. You have seen more election deniers get into office. And so the internal workings of the election administration process is also starting to show signs of stress.
We've been seeing headlines recently about Trump-leaning election officials in a number of different states. We talked about the story out of Georgia, which, if I understand it correctly, and if not, I know that you'll correct me. In Georgia, a normally bureaucratic official who is there not to evaluate anything, but basically to sign off, hey, we've done it, we've counted votes. They now have some potentially discretionary power to say, I don't like what I'm seeing here to some degree. Explain that to us.
Yeah, so I think that, apropos of your first question, this is probably the clearest example of where they have evolved over time in their tactics. So in 2020, there was in one state, in Michigan, where the Republicans tried to get the county canvassing board from Wayne County, which is Detroit, to refuse to sign the certification documents. Now, that's a ministerial act. What do I mean by that? There's no discretion in whether they sign these documents. It is a formality. It's part of the pageantry of democracy that, after elections, you get these canvassing boards that come in and sign off on the paperwork, right? And Donald Trump and Ronna McDaniel actually called the local county officials responsible for the certification and tried to get them to refuse to certify. That failed. Okay. And we then saw them try at the state level, and that failed, and then obviously at Congress. Well, so what have they now done in the run-up to 2024? They have tried to replace who are on these state canvassing boards with election deniers who will refuse to certify even when they don't have discretion. And in Georgia, they are trying to change the rules so that those election officials actually have more discretion and make this less ministerial. So they are both changing the personnel, they're changing the identity of the scoreboard operators, and also trying to give those people more power. And that is what we're seeing in Georgia. But it's not just in Georgia. You know, in 2022, we saw Cochise County, Arizona, try to refuse to certify the election results. My law firm and I brought litigation and prevented that from happening. We saw it in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. And I expect that that is the kind of thing that shows the evolution of the Trump election denier movement.
I mean, I don't know exactly how to ask this, but as someone who's been following that evolution, how worried should we be, and how much of this can we prevent in advance with some kind of strategy versus how much of it is by nature just reacting to whatever they try?
So look, you can always be prepared for everything you can be prepared for, but you can never know what you aren't prepared for, if that makes sense. Or as Donald Rumsfeld once said, there are the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, right? So look, I mean, I think voters should have confidence that there are good election officials, there are lawyers, there are nonprofits, there are political campaigns that are focused on these issues and will ensure that every lawful vote counts and that they are eventually certified. But that doesn't mean that you can prepare for every new tactic. I mean, that the other side is going to come up for. So I want people to be attentive. I want people to be prepared, but I don't want people to be defeatist, because Donald Trump wins when the cynics win. He wants people to lose hope. And there's one thing that Kamala Harris has reinvigorated in the Democratic Party is a sense of joy and hopefulness.
Speaking of Kamala Harris, as I mentioned, it will be Kamala Harris, not Mike Pence, counting the Electoral College votes in January. How relevant and important is that big picture to the strategy that they may try to apply?
Look, I mean, so to be clear, she doesn't count them. She oversees the counting.
Oversees, fair, yeah.
Right. And Congress passed something, a new law, the Electoral Count Reform Act, that clarified the limited role of the vice president and made some other changes that make it harder for things to go wrong in Congress. I think that it is obviously better that you have Kamala Harris rather than Mike Pence. I think it is better if we have Speaker Jeffries than if we have Speaker Johnson, and so forth. But I think that the place that people ought to be focusing their attention, and this was my opinion, frankly, in 2020 as well, is at these local levels, right? It is hard for the process to get derailed after the electors have been selected and they voted in the Electoral College. I won't say it's impossible, but it is hard. It is much easier if you are the Republicans trying to be disruptive to do the kinds of things like you see them trying in Georgia, to do the kinds of things like I mentioned they did in Arizona in 2020 at the local county level, because it's just there's so many more counties, right? And you can be more disruptive at that local level. So I'm glad Congress passed the Electoral Count Reform Act, and I am confident that we will have accurate certification in Congress, and I'm confident we'll have it at the state and local level. But I think that the fact that we have a Democratic Secretary of State in Nevada, in Arizona, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania are much more significant than what's going to go on in the halls of Congress.
So I'm hearing you say you have a level of confidence. I've also, it was either read or maybe it was a transcript of an interview or something you wrote, where you are predicting that there will be some attempted refusals, at least at the local level. Explain why you both expect the refusals to be attempted, but in a general sense are confident.
Yeah, look, I mean, Donald Trump at a political rally called out 3 of 5 members of the otherwise obscure Georgia State Elections Board. Okay. And it's interesting that he called them out by name. He said that they were pit bulls and that one of the things they would do is help ensure his victory. And that, as I mentioned, he called out only 3 of the 5. So it's not even like he's like the board as a whole is doing well. He was like, these 3 are doing well. And that is because his plan is to make it harder for you to vote and easier for him to cheat after the election. And having these local election boards where there are election deniers have discretion is a way in which he can try to set the stage for his folks to cheat after the election. Now, that's why I think that this is significant. The fact that we saw that in Cochise County, Arizona, we saw that in counties in Pennsylvania in 2022 was instructive. The fact that we beat them in court was instructive on how to fight back. So I think people need to be expecting and be concerned, and I am concerned, don't get me wrong, I worry about everything, that we could see this take place in county after county after county around the country. But ultimately, the fact is these county officials don't have the discretion not to certify. They can't gum up the works. They can't undermine free and fair elections lawfully. And so you will have lawyers like me and others turning to the courts and insisting that the courts step in where the political branches fail. And I have every confidence that, as we saw in 2020, the courts will hold.
Let's say the courts hold eventually, but what they succeed at is creating delays of different kinds. And you could tell us what categories of delays are even possible. But let's imagine that they're able to introduce a delay during something that's supposed to take 2 weeks and it stretches. What could the effect of that be?
Yeah, so there was a lot of talk about this in 2020, and I think it's a really good question to, again, give people a refresher for 2024. So different elections have different timetables for when things must happen. So very, somewhat famously, I represented Al Franken in a Senate recount in 2008. He was not sworn in finally until July, right? So for House and Senate, you have deadlines of certification that are really for early January when Congress gets sworn in. But, you can have a Congress that is not full, does not have every election resolved at the time that it takes place. You can't really do that when you're talking about a governor or a president, right? So the certification timetables are more compressed. And for president, we are really talking about meeting what is referred to as the safe harbor deadline. This is the deadline by which if states certify their election results all the way through the governor, that when that slate of electors then presents their credentials and votes as part of the Electoral College, there's a presumption, a very strong presumption that is the accurate slate of electors and it can't be challenged. The date after that is actually the meeting of the Electoral College. The final date after that is January 6th, which is the day that Congress tallies the votes. So it's a relatively quicker timetable than what I just described, for example, for the Senate and the House, where you try to meet that early January deadline, but it's not essential. And in 2020, one of the strategies that Republicans engaged in, that Donald Trump engaged in, was to try to force those deadlines to slip. In fact, one of the least, I think, well understood facts, David, about the violent insurrection on January 6th is that the reason why they were storming the Capitol on January 6th was to prevent certification on the date prescribed in the Constitution. They had this theory that if there was no certification on January 6th, that somehow Donald Trump could then just stay in office.
If you can somehow make it to midnight, then it's like null and void, and Trump just stays as president, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you remember, in the days after January 6th, Peter Navarro talked about the Green Bay sweep, and that this was the theory, right? So we worry a lot about the time deadlines and whether they are not necessarily playing for success, but they are playing for delay. I think the fact is we all know that. That is one of the things where we have gotten much smarter after 2020. I mean, we knew it in 2020, but I think that there will be a real effort to push and make sure states are meeting their marks and meeting their deadlines.
I hate to see everything in a partisan lens, but speaking for myself, if Donald Trump really wins this thing, I want him to be the president. I don't want to end up not having Trump through this sort of subterfuge and manipulation. It would be devastating in terms of my opinion of what's happening in the United States as far as the electorate, what people's values and priorities are. But if Trump wins this thing, then wow, we've really got to look at ourselves rather than at delays or ministerial perversions the way you're talking about. It
Look,
seems
let me,
as yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say let me react to that. I sat with Hillary Clinton on election night in 2016. And there was nothing that I wanted more than to say there is a legal way for this election to not turn out the way it is.
Right.
And ultimately, she made the correct decision, the hard decision. Believe me, it was a hard decision to accept the results, even though she had won the popular vote, even though people were calling for us to seek recounts and contests and all of that. In 2004, I was a general counsel to John Kerry when we lost the presidency, and what was a devastating loss for the country if you look back.
And Mark, just to remind the audience, if I remember, that was 140,000 votes in Ohio that hinged on. Yeah.
Yeah. And once again, we made the hard decision that there just wasn't a way to contest the outcome of Ohio and flip the election. So I have told candidates that this was a close election, but it is not an election that can be that is close enough for there to be a recount or an election contest and the like. And so I feel like I have walked that walk. I've also been involved in very close elections where they have gone to recounts and the results have been have changed, and most often they don't, but sometimes they do. But you're talking about elections that are decided by hundreds of votes, not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of votes.
Right.
And I think that is where what Donald Trump did in 2020 really did a disservice for the country.
In the sense that it has reframed sort of the entire conversation around the concept of opinion as to who won rather than fact?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, the fact is that Donald Trump didn't lose a single state by, a very, very narrow margin. He lost 5 states. By the end of the day, Donald Trump's claim was he was cheated in Nevada, he was cheated in Arizona, he was cheated in Pennsylvania, he was cheated in Wisconsin, he was cheated in Georgia. I mean, now, he wasn't cheating in any of those states, but there was some type of post-election challenge in each of those. There were recounts or contests or other litigation in all of those states, and like that did a real disservice to the country, because the fact is it wasn't just that he lost. He lost Georgia by 11,000 votes, which is a lot of votes. It is that he lost Michigan by, tens of thousands. He lost Pennsylvania by tens of thousands. He lost Wisconsin by tens of thousands. And he created, though, in among Republicans, this sense that even when you lose 7 million votes in the popular vote, even when you lose by multiple states, you can still somehow just throw, and then you lose 60 plus lawsuits, you can still say somehow you're aggrieved. And that is really unhealthy for democracy.
Before I get to my final question, one kind of just wacky thing I wanted to get your reaction to. Some of the stranger things I heard in the aftermath of 2020 were the ones that stand out were that some of the Arizona ballots had a particular type of bamboo fiber that is not native to Arizona, and that might be indicative of fill in the blanks, what kind of foul play, might be a bamboo that grows in China, etc. In Pennsylvania, something about the number of sandwiches that were delivered to election workers did not seem commensurate with the number of election workers. Therefore, maybe there were ballots either being brought in or taken out, different versions of these sort of stories. When you hear that sort of stuff, that's not even in the ballpark of the things that could ever even really help them, right? Like that's just the wacky stuff. That's not the techniques you look at and try to prevent.
That's right. I mean, and that's why I started by when you asked me where am I on the spectrum, like the kinds of claims that they were making after 2020 were just ridiculous. I mean, all of the stuff about the dead Venezuelan dictator somehow having rigged the machines, crazy. Remember, we referred to, not we, the other side referred to a series of their cases filed in Georgia and Michigan and elsewhere as the Kraken cases. Kraken is a mythological sea creature. I mean, the stuff we got from the other side, you mentioned the bamboo fibers in Arizona. That was not true. They also had a theory about Sharpie pens. There was a whole thing called Sharpie Gate. They filed 3 lawsuits over alleged the use of Sharpie pens. There were no Sharpie pens. I mean, it was all crazy stuff. What I want folks to understand is that they have upgraded their legal theories. They are still not meritorious. But they are more traditional voter suppression theories. They are based on lies, but they are not the kinds of crazy lies that we saw peddled in 2020. So we're all going to be, busy making sure that democracy is protected. Unfortunately, the other side is going to be trying to, mislead people and spread disinformation and misinformation. But it is not likely going to be the wildest, crazy theories that we saw in the past.
So last thing, very often after listening to 20 minutes of this sort of thing, people end up depressed and overwhelmed, but then they go back to, if we win by so much, that this stuff isn't even plausible, that's the best insurance against any of these techniques. Is that true? Is it true that if this is a landslide victory for Kamala Harris, everything that they would try to do becomes even more difficult?
So look, the most important thing people can do is to make sure they are registered to vote, they have a plan to vote, and that they vote, okay? And that their friends and families do. Because certainly the most important thing is that Kamala Harris get more votes in more states and the Electoral College than Donald Trump. And the larger the margin, the harder it is for Donald Trump to contest those margins in court. But I also want to be realistic about something, which is that Donald Trump's lies about elections have only grown larger and larger. I mean, Donald Trump has said that he believes he won Minnesota. Okay. Like, he lost Minnesota by 7 points. Like, Donald Trump has said that he's going to win New York and he's going to win New Jersey. I mean, I think that even if Kamala Harris won every swing state plus, you know, the next round of states, you know, North Carolina, whatever, you know, wins Texas, you know, Florida, and it's an electoral college landslide, and the closest race is several 100,000 votes, Donald Trump is still going to come out and say there was fraud. So we need to just bake into the cake that Donald Trump is never going to accept that he lost an election. He is always going to falsely claim fraud, and his supporters will unfortunately support him. And we cannot assume that the establishment Republican Party, such as it is, will do the right thing. I mean, the fact is they haven't done the right thing in years around these election denier lies. And so that's going to be the state of play. But should we aim for the most robust victory for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz? Absolutely. Should we aim for an overwhelming sweep in the U.S. Senate? Believe me, yes. Should we want Hakeem Jeffries to have a 25 to 50 vote majority in the House? From my mouth to God's ears, right? That we should want all those things. But we should also recognize that it is not going to stop the other side from lying.
All right. Marc Elias, voting rights attorney and founder of Democracy Docket. Marc, thanks so much for talking to us and also for all the great work you're doing.
David, thank you for having me, and thank you for your contribution to spreading good information out there.